I suffer from depression and anxiety. It's a bit scary, really, because I know that I didn't feel right, basically, as long as I could remember. And it took me a very long time to actually go to doctors and accept that something was somewhat wrong with me. Yeah, and that it was quite hard for me to do because I don't really like talking about these things. I'm quite closed when it comes to those sort of intimate details. I mean, I guess it's kind of a relief because it sort of has gives an explanation of why I was feeling like this, and so it's not just there's actually a reason behind it. It is finding out you're essentially ill, and it's not necessarily curable. I suppose you can call it maintainable. It's not like a cold or anything where you can take some antibiotics and it's gone within a few days. This is probably something I'm going to suffer from for the rest of my life, and that's quite hard to deal with. But it's like any illness. If you have to get a diagnosis with it and then you can start to work on it, I feel that now I know that that's what's wrong with me. I can do things that will help me out. I was diagnosed probably about 2 years ago. I wouldn't say misdiagnosed, but I have been misunderstood. Probably throughout my teenage years, my parents and the school just thought I was a bit rebellious and wasn't really interested in what I was doing, and I was purposely making myself the outsider and doing these things and acting the way I did just because I was a rebellious teenager and wanted to go against the grain. But yeah, I haven't been misdiagnosed, but probably misunderstood. So when I was diagnosed, it made me realise that, yeah, something is wrong with me, and it made me realise that I wasn't doing anything to help myself. The stuff I probably was doing and how I was feeling probably wasn't going to make me feel any happier or make me feel any better. I feel like now, I can try and cope with it, and there are methods out there and things available for people who know that this is an issue for them that they can do themselves. Whereas if I hadn't been brave enough to take myself to the doctors, I would probably still be in the same position I was 3 years ago before I was diagnosed, where I didn't really know myself and I didn't understand why I was like this, and I just realised, I thought that maybe it was just me, this is who I was as a person, because I put other people before me, and now sometimes I've realised that I do need to start thinking about myself a bit more. Not in a selfish way, but I do need to focus on myself. So when I went to the doctors, they prescribed me medication, and then I took that, it had a bit of a battle with myself whether I was going to take the medication or not, and I talked to some people about it because I have a close friend that suffers as well, and we had some conversations about it, and he wasn't sold on the idea of medication, so it put me off a bit. And then my mum wasn't too keen on the idea. She just thought it was sort of a phase and that I'd get over it, and I was just at a stressful period of my life. So it was a bit of a battle with myself, and then I decided to take the medication, and then within a year they had tripled my dosage because they felt it wasn't really working and I wasn't getting any better. They advised that I went and saw a counsellor. The surgery booked me in with a specialist mental health nurse who then wanted me to see her every 2 weeks. Well, I have struggled with self-harm in the past and stuff like that, but that was no way to deal with it. I distract myself. I guess I shut myself down and I try and block it out. Try and do things that I enjoy, but when you're at your lowest, even the things that you enjoy most in life, you aren't enjoying them in that moment. But throughout my life, there's been various things that probably haven't helped it and potentially made it worse and really heightened it. It sounds really silly, but throughout my life, the people I've been closest to and trusted the most have basically ended up screwing me over and just walking all over me. So I find it quite hard to trust people nowadays, and That's why even like talking about mental health, there's not a lot of people that do know about this stuff, purely because I don't actually really know if I can trust them. I find it really, really hard to get close to people. It will take, at first I seem quite cold and like closed off, and that puts people off. But if they take the time and they do want to like be my friend, then it just takes me a while to build up the trust. Basically everything negative, I suppose, rushes straight through your head. Well, my head anyway. I sort of don't really see myself as a good person, like, at all, and that's probably the main thought that comes into my head. There are quite a few days where I do wake up and think it would be better if I wasn't here. It just all hits you at once, and it's overwhelming, and there's not one clear thought. It all just rushes in your head, and it's playing, it's fast forwarded, like everything's going through your head, and it's just a vicious cycle that you can't. It's in your own head, and you can't physically stop it. I'll be leaving my house and I'll be on my way somewhere, and I'll have to look down at my feet to check that I'm not wearing odd shoes. I've never once left the house wearing odd shoes or anything like that, but I have to always just, as I'm walking, look down at my feet to check my shoes match, and I don't know where that's come from. I struggle quite a lot leaving the house because I check my bag about 5 times and double check that my keys are in there, even though I know full well, in my head, I'm like, Jodie, you know they're in there, you know they're there, but I have to keep checking, and then I'll be walking wherever I need to go. I could nearly be there or halfway there, and it will just like ping in my head that I've left the straighteners on or I've left the oven on. Even if I haven't even used them that day, it just suddenly in my head, and most of the times, well, basically all the times, I will have to turn around and go home and check these things are off, and then still worry about it throughout the day. I probably first self-harmed when I was 13 maybe, if not younger. Can't really remember. It used to be, and obviously I was a teenager in high school then. It was quite bad. I don't really think at first I understood what I was doing to myself, but it just kind of kept happening, and you do it, and somewhat it took away the pain that was inside, like it numbed, even though you were hurting yourself on the outside and making yourself bleed and scarring your body, that these scars will be there for the rest of my life. But so throughout school I was doing it, and then I think when I first got into a first proper relationship, this person really didn't agree with it at first, and it wasn't necessarily a case of, at first he wasn't worried about me. He sort of turned around and said that it was a stupid thing to do and it was ridiculous and I shouldn't be doing it. I knew I shouldn't be doing it, but he wasn't understanding why I was doing it. So if something got bad in that relationship, I didn't have a release, because obviously prior to that, the self-harming was my release when I was that low. Nowadays, I went about a year and a half without hurting myself, and obviously that's quite a big thing when you've basically grown up doing this to yourself. That was quite a big thing not to have done it. Now I'm on top of it. I just feel like now I can somewhat control it, but I couldn't tell you how many times I've done it in the past 2-3 years, because it's actually something that I'm quite embarrassed about. In school, I would always be wearing long sleeves. And if now it does happen, I will be wearing long sleeves, and I will be hiding it. So you literally don't want anyone to see it, because I am embarrassed, and I don't like that I do that to myself. I sort of block it out that I've done it, because I got so used to lying to people that I hadn't hurt myself, I believe, started lying to myself that I wasn't doing this, and if I could pretend I hadn't done it. And yeah, I got so used to hiding it in my head, I got pushed so far back in my mind that I could even, I guess, convince myself that I hadn't done it. There's a lot of times where I just feel like I don't really have a place. I could have the closest friends in the world, I can have a great family, but I don't really have a sense of belonging anywhere, and I feel like sometimes maybe everything would be better off if I wasn't around anymore, but these feelings come up quite a lot and people don't really understand them, but I always think when I get in that state and I am thinking of this, I always think like, what would my mum do? Like, I couldn't, because there are people that care about me and there's people I care about, and the last thing I'd really want to do is hurt those people, and I just can't imagine like the pain my mum would go through, because day to day I suffer a lot of like internal pain and hurt, and what I feel I would never wish on anyone else. I never want anyone to feel the way I feel. First year of uni, I was living in student halls, so that's a lot of people. I was so anxious that I couldn't even use my own kitchen. I couldn't go into the kitchen, or if I was trying to get out of my room and leave the corridor and go out, I would have to listen at my door that no one was in the corridor. But I do get a bit funny when people are staying over. It makes me really uncomfortable. Obviously, people are going to stay over, and I feel like if I know them quite well, I can deal with it. But sometimes if, say, my friend were to invite 5 or 6 people over just to hang out as groups of friends do, I get really uncomfortable. And I shut myself in my room, and especially if it gets to like late at night and stuff and they're still there, it can trigger an anxiety attack. Be surprised, I do have some really close friends and I do go out quite a bit. Like, I go to gigs and sometimes I go on nights out with them and stuff. It takes a lot of building up, and usually I'm really panicky and try and think of excuses of why I can't go, or shall I just tell them I'm ill. But if I do go and I get there, so usually in these places there's probably like a bar or something, and I'll have a couple of drinks, and I always do even if we're just hanging out and it's not one of those situations where we're getting really drunk or anything like that, I will find myself having a few more drinks than everyone else, purely just to deal with being out of my house and somewhat exposed to loads of people, most of the time people I don't know. And I mean, I do have fun when I go out, but it takes a lot to drive me out, and I do get like quite self-conscious. It's quite hard to explain. Like panic attacks and anxiety attacks they're quite similar, but with anxiety attack, there's not one thing that's panicking me. I just feel like overwhelmed and stressed out, and you do feel like you can't really breathe and you are really uncomfortable, and you have to remove yourself from the situation. And sometimes people don't really understand that. They think, oh, you're just getting a bit anxious because maybe you're around strangers or something like that. I was in quite a long-term relationship a few years back, and it worked really well. We were really good together. So it took me a while to be able to trust this person, and I trusted them, but in some sense, something in my head was telling me I didn't, and I would convince myself that maybe something's going on when it wasn't, or they were doing something behind my back when they might not have even been doing it. I feel like it's quite a struggle for the other person there's nothing they can really do. Like they love you. That he loved me, and he was seeing me that upset. And I imagine it can be quite hard to see someone you love be so down and low and having all these thoughts about harming themselves, and there's not really a lot you can do about it. To have a lot of self-hate towards myself. The depression and anxiety side of things is not an attractive trait, like in the sense that if you're judging someone from the outside and you don't really understand these things, I suppose it can seem as like it would be a lot of work to be with someone that gets so depressed and anxious all the time and struggles going out places, gets really low where they're even thinking about killing themselves. Like, imagine that people would struggle being with someone like that, and that's what I mean. I suppose I would, sounds cringy, but I would like to find someone again and have the companionship. I feel as if I would be burdening them with my problems, and then that would create the whole thing again where I'm hiding how I'm feeling and hiding my mental health issues, and essentially lying to them and lying to myself at the same time. It's a bit of a somewhat taboo subject. I mean, my family are great, but living with your parents, they're going to notice that there's something different about you, and they did ask, like, are you upset and things, but I suppose they just put it down to me being an angsty teenager and meant to be this rebellious child. I suppose they just put it down to that. And then when I got diagnosed, I did reach out and I did tell my mum, because obviously if I was going to take this medication, I thought maybe I would talk to her about it before I do take it. And she somewhat dismissed the idea, and I suppose it might be quite hard to hear that your child is feeling like this and you can't do anything about it. But yeah, she sort of just somewhat put it down to me just being at a stressful period of my life. Great and everything, and I love them so much, but I don't really think I could sit there and tell them how I'm really feeling. Like, I couldn't sit there and like tell my parents, the people that created me, that I wasn't happy being alive. Would hurt them so much, and they wouldn't really know what to do. I feel like there's still that generation barrier where not really understanding that this is a big issue, that now it's more coming to light that it does need to be spoken about and dealt with. And I don't want them to ask too many questions like, why do you feel like this, or potentially blame themselves. Sort of come to the acceptance that this is just who I am, sort of thing, and I feel like they might blame themselves for it, and I don't want them to do that. It doesn't define me as a person, and I suppose that's why I don't really tell a lot of people. It's an illness. You shouldn't be judged and preconceived and potentially avoided because you suffer within yourself. Don't lie to yourself. Don't hide these things. Everyone's going to say, go and talk to someone or go and see a doctor, but I would say focus on yourself. With me, I get so invested in other people, and I've always put other people before myself. And with these issues, you do need to think about yourself and what you're doing. Please don't ever feel like you're in a position where you need to hurt yourself, because that is the one thing I will always say. It makes me sound a hypocrite, but I will say, do not hurt yourself. Think for yourself. Don't be thinking that because you've seen something on a film or a TV programme that person is suffering from as the same mental health illness that you are suffering from, that you have to be the same as that. You are your own individual person, and everyone's mental health is completely different. No one's is the same.